parables. We're going to look at about three of them. One we've already covered, the marriage of the king's son, earlier in connection with the kingdom parables, because it was very similar to another parable, the Great Supper. And so we're on our 27th parable, and we've got 2 more weeks, this week and next week in May, and then the summer quarter will begin. And I've been asked to teach the young adult class for the summer quarter. We're going to look at the book of Jude. And so Brother Warren is going to step in and take care of the summer quarter in here. And you will be studying Satan. So, Satan. Have you heard of him? Know your adversary. So, yeah. And so that will be the summer quarter in here. And then I'm trying to decide, I could probably do another 10 parables or so. And so I hate to divide, split something up. So I'm trying to decide whether we should come back in September and do some more of these or move on to something else. So there's still some good things to cover. So if you have an opinion on that, you can let me know. But at any rate, that's kind of where we're going. Now, on your Wednesday night classes, the regular Wednesday night adult classes will end at the end of June when Foundations is here. And then we'll start our summer series in July, The Way of Salvation. And so we'll have guest speakers for about 7 weeks, July into August. So that will take up several Wednesday nights in the summer. But we'll get all that in the bulletin, and so you'll be aware of what's going on. So we're in Luke chapter 13, and I think I told you last week, to start back up, if you were going to read ahead, if you look back up in verse 54 of chapter 12, this is really part of the context of this parable of the barren fig tree. But notice there in verse 54, then he also said to the multitudes, whenever you see a cloud rising out of the west, immediately you say a shower is coming. And so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, you say there will be hot weather. And there is. Hypocrites! You can discern the face of the sky and of the earth, but how is it you do not discern the time? Well, what was the time? What is Jesus referring to? What time were they not discerning? Well, yeah, they were not discerning the fact that He was there, the Son of God was there, and that not only had He come, but their rejection was going to be the last straw for God as far as the Jewish nation was concerned. And their judgment was not far off. And He said, you don't understand. You can decipher the weather, but you don't understand that how close you are to your downfall because of your refusal to accept Me. Yes, and why even of yourselves do you not judge what is right? When you go with your adversary to the magistrate, make every effort along the way to settle with him, lest he drag you to the judge deliver you to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I tell you, you shall not depart from there till you have paid the very last mite. You need to get yourself right with God, Jewish people. And you need to settle up with Him and get on His good side, or some bad things are coming. And so that gets us into chapter 13. There were present at that season some who told Him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. Apparently these fellows were in the very act of offering sacrifices to God when Pilate's soldiers killed them, slaughtered them there, and their blood was mingled with their own animals' blood. And of course this points up a common belief of the day, which if you go back to John chapter 9 go over to John chapter 9 verse 1, Jesus' disciples are walking along and they see a man born blind, and what did they ask? Yeah, who sinned, this man or his parents? Kind of stupid to ask if he sinned, if he was born that way, unless you're a Calvinist, I guess. But who sinned, this man or his parents? In other words, people who are doing well, they're being blessed by God. They must be living right. People who are not doing so well, having hard times, they're obviously not living right. That's an incorrect view. I mean, had they never read the book of Job? It's an incorrect view of life. Bad things come everyone's way, and good things as well. Rain falls on the what? Just and the unjust. And so there's an incorrect view, and we see it here. What about these Galileans? They must have been some bad people, right, for Pilate to do that to them. And Jesus said, do you suppose that these Galileans were worse sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered such things? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you Jews, you will all likewise perish. Or those 18. So he brings in another example. Obviously a tragedy that had happened fairly recently. Those 18 on whom the tower in Siloam fell and killed them. Do you think they were worse sinners than all other men who dwelt in Jerusalem? No. But unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. So in that context then, we get the parable of the barren fig tree. He also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Then he said to the keeper of the vineyard, look, for 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree and find none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground? But he answered and said to him, sir, let it alone this year also until I dig around it and fertilize it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that, you can cut it down. Well, it's pretty obvious who Jesus is referring to in this parable. Who's the owner of the vineyard or of the orchard? This Greek word here can be used for both. And it might have been planted in a vineyard, but it could have been an orchard of fig trees. At either rate, fig trees were very important to the economy of Palestine in the first century. It bore fruit most of the year, 10 months out of the year. In fact, at least 3 crops. You had some immature figs in April, and then two mature crops, one in early June and the later one in August. And it was not a tall tree, but it had extremely dense foliage, so very well suited for cool shade in the summer heat. And the fig tree, of course, and the grapevine were symbols of what in the Bible as far as Israel was concerned? We see that phraseology in the Old Testament. Every man, during the time of David or Solomon, every man from Dan to Beersheba dwelling under his what? His vine and his fig tree. What did that mean? Things were what? Good, yeah. Times of peace and prosperity. Every man dwelling under his own vine, under his own fig tree. Everybody's doing well. Things are good. So very important to the people of that day. Who's the owner of the vineyard? God. Yeah, God is. Who's the vineyard? Who's the orchard? Who's the fig tree, the barren fig tree? Yeah, the nation of Israel, absolutely. It's interesting, according to Leviticus, planted a tree, fig tree. How long did you have to let it grow before you could take any fruit from it? How many years?
3 years.
3 years, that's right, 3 years. Leviticus, what is that? Leviticus 19. So, Leviticus 19, you got to wait at least 3. So if he's been coming for 3, and he's finding no figs, so how long has that been going on now? 6 years. 6 years. And so it's pretty hopelessly barren. And so we've got God representing the owner, the man, and the tree symbolizing the Jewish nation. And of course, he says, you've cumbered the ground. The Jews not only actually rebelled against God, but God, they were supposed to be an example to the people about them. to the nations around them. They were supposed to be a good influence. They actually hindered God's truth to the people around them. Going to Romans chapter 2. But it's interesting. Look over at, God's asking pretty much the same thing he did in Isaiah, right? Look over to Isaiah chapter 5. Song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up, cleared out its stones, and planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst and also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge with please between me and my vineyard. Now notice this question the Lord asked. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild? What could have God given? Could he have done more for these people down through their history? I mean, he gave them every advantage. Paul says, Holy Spirit through Paul says in Romans 2, what advantage did the Jew have then, right? He said in every way, they had the oracles of God. They had the law. What more advantage could he have given them? And this is what he gets. And so, now you're in the final dispensation, and you finally reject the very Son of God himself, and then you reject the teaching of the Holy Spirit through the apostles. That is, Christ authorized representatives, his ambassadors. And so you reject Christ himself, and then you reject the Holy Spirit's teaching through the apostles. You know, what is there left? According to Matthew chapter 3, Jesus said, even now, what? The axe is what? It's laid at the root of the tree. You can't discern the times. I mean, it's coming. And so, it did come in the form of who? The judgment came in the form of what? Yeah, it came in the form of the Roman army. Absolutely. Just like God used the Assyrians and the Babylonians to judge his people in the Old Testament. You know, remember the book of Habakkuk? Blew Habakkuk's mind. He couldn't understand. You know, those people are wicked. You're going to use those people to judge your people. I said, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'll take care of them for you. I mean, they're just chaff. I can take care of them anytime. Besides, you know, I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of them. But he uses wicked nations to judge sometimes people that are better than them because of the advantages that they have. And so he does the same thing with the Romans in AD 7. So that's the thrust of the parable for these people. And I'm sure if they grasped it at all, it was pretty much of a shock that Jesus would say these things. And so that's the major point, the impending devastation and disaster that's coming upon them. Now, the question becomes, are there any lessons in this parable of the barren fig tree for us? I don't expect the Roman armies to come knocking at my door next week. Yes?
Well, I know I'm diverting a little bit here, but I just got to mention this. We talk about how long it takes for these fig trees to bear. In January specifically, 1974, I was taking a convoy of 5-ton trucks and a mixture of others. But the reason I mentioned the 5-ton truck, the weather was really bad. We had a police escort with our trucks scattered from the beachhead all the way up to Cangier, France, which is a long way. But one of my trucks, I don't know what happened, but the weather was bad. But one of my drivers veered off the road and hit an olive tree. Imagine how much that cost us. And the thing that was interesting to me, he just barely scraped the bark on the tree. But we paid dearly for that olive tree. Because if I can remember, they said it'd take 15 years for those things to start bearing.
Yeah.
But I have never forgotten that lesson. And of course, I know how much we paid, but I'm not going to discuss it here. I still believe in
That olive tree was, it was important to those people.
I guarantee you.
Well, and certainly olive trees as well. During the first century, olive and fig trees both very important to their economy. It's interesting as we get into talking about lessons. To keep this in mind, we talk about how this, some lessons we can draw from this for us personally. But notice, it wasn't just a matter in the parable that the fig tree was taking up space. It was taking up space. It could have been used by a more fruitful tree. But what else does he say in the parable that the tree was doing? It was using up. It was actually using up nutrients from the ground and wasting nutrients from the ground that should have been going to others. Okay? So it wasn't just a matter of taking up space, but a matter of waste as well. So, when we talk about this tree and we start looking out at some things that we can adapt to our own lives, the first thing we want to look at is the fact that the tree was useless. Now, do we in the church have some people that are useless? I mean, let's just ask ourselves this question. Well, there are useless people everywhere. And unfortunately, anytime we're not willing to work or to be active in the work of the Lord, yeah, He wants us to bear fruit, to be fruitful. You go back to Matthew 5, we're to be like the salt. Well, salt by definition is useful. If it's not useful, He said you throw it out. And so there's the sin of uselessness. And again, where people are condemned, if you go into Matthew 25 and you talk about the people on the left and the right, the people on the left are not condemned because of things that they did. They're not condemned because of sins they committed. They are condemned because of things they what? They didn't do. They're condemned for things that they didn't do. And so again, God measures worth in terms of use. And He doesn't demand the impossible or the sensational or the extraordinary, things that we cannot accomplish or do, but He does expect from every tree some fruit, right? Fruit. So, and as we just pointed out, not only was it not doing any good, but it was actually hindering good from being done. Why should it use up the ground, was the fellow's question. It was in the way, taking nourishment. Do you know of any people like that? In the animal world, we call them parasites, right? Those things that live off the others. We got people like that in society. A tick is a parasite, right? He just hops on your back or your dog's ear or whatever, sucks away. And so, you ever known anybody that wasn't particularly helpful or active in the work of the local church, but he could sure tell you what was wrong with it? Tell you what was wrong with other people, what everybody's problem was. So, there's probably not a greater crime in society than to be a parasite, taking more from the world than what the world gives you. Basically is what it means. And the same goes for the church. And that's what's going to happen if you don't produce fruit. If you're not producing fruit, if I'm not producing fruit, if you're not producing fruit, well then that means you're taking. You have to be taking. You're taking the nutrients out of the ground, but you're giving nothing back. And so, what's the end result? For fruitless, useless trees. Yeah, destruction. Cut down, thrown into the fire. Just like those branches in John chapter 15. Self-destruction is inevitable. Let's ask the question. Was it, and of course, everybody's got an excuse, right? I'm a fig tree, and I'm not bearing fruit. So whose fault is it? Now, whose fault do I say it is? Everybody's got an excuse, so I'm a fig tree and I'm not bearing fruit. Now look, I'm a literal fig tree, I'm not bearing fruit. Whose fault is it? Huh? Yeah. It could be the people, it could be the soil's fault. Could be the rain's fault. Could be the sun's fault, right? But it's always everybody else's fault with me. That's why I'm not producing. And so usually, we can find somebody to blame it on. But the problem, of course, is in the end, this fig tree is condemned because he just failed to do the work of the tree. What's the purpose of the tree? What's the purpose of a fig tree? Of any fruit tree? Produce fruit. So if you don't fulfill your purpose, then you invite destruction. So if I'm a Christian, then what's my purpose? Yeah, I'm supposed to do the work of the Lord that He's given us to do. That's my purpose. So, now, here's the other thing, though. Fortunately, we need to consider before we leave this parable. And that is the owner's patience. Right? I mean, now let's think about it for a minute. This tree, first it goes 3 years. Okay? Can't get anything on it. So for the next 3 years, he comes seeking fruit. No fruit. How often do you think he came? Looking for it. I just told you that a fig tree would bear about 10 months out of the year, right? And yield at least 3 crops, minimum. So, I mean, he came several times a year. And maybe, I don't know, maybe every month. But the guy keeps coming back, looking for fruit. He says, I keep coming and there's nothing here. And that's the way God is. He's slow to anger and long-suffering, right? 2 Peter 3:9. We often ask ourselves, you look around, you look at the way the world is, the evil that's out there, the way people treat one another, and you say, man, why does God allow this to keep going on? Well, 2 Peter 3:9 tells you why. He's long-suffering, not wishing that any should perish. Every day he lets it stand, and every day somebody might repent, change, be saved. But, on the other hand, as long-suffering and as patient as he is, divine patience can be what? Exhausting. That's it. That's the word. Exhausting. Divine patience can eventually be exhausted. It was with these people in the first century. They left Egypt in around, 1500 BC? Something like that. So, I mean, he's put up with them. And from the moment they left, from the moment they got out, they were rebelling. Right? I mean, the moment they got out, they started murmuring about water and murmuring about this and murmuring about food and wanting to go back, and then they get to the mountain, and then, they're building golden calf. I mean, and when he finally said, you're going to wander for 40 years, he said, you've tempted me 10 times already. 10 times. I mean, it was constant. And so, 1,500 years, 15 to 1,600 years, he put up with that. And he finally said, that's it. No more. Yeah, it's a long time. So, the Romans are coming, and that's going to be the end of you as a commonwealth. I mean, there is a place called a state, a nation called Israel, but it's not the Israelites of that day. It's just a political state. You had something you want to say?
Yeah, but I'm in Missouri right now.
Okay. You have the right to reserve and then come back and bring it up?
Yeah. Thank you, Brother Greg.
So, in this parable, you have a definite period of divine grace. And, let's go back to the Old Testament. What what did God tell the patriarchs about the land that they were walking on? When he talked to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and he would say, one of these days, I'm going to give your descendants this land. But he would say, but what? What about right now, while you're sojourning here, while you're living in tents? Why am I not going to give it to you right now? What was the reason?
Their transgression is not full.
Yeah, the iniquity of the Amorite was not yet full. He said, I've not, my divine patience has not been exhausted yet with the people that live there. I'm not ready to push them out. I'm not ready to destroy them because it's just not time yet. It's not full. So what that tells me, though, is that at some point, divine patience runs out. It's full. It's exhausted.
The flood came. His patience was exhausted.
His patience was exhausted with the antediluvian world. And even then, he gave them 120 years or whatever it was that Noah preached. But at some point, it's exhausted. And so, here comes his son. He's the final message from heaven. And then his apostles. And the Jews have this one last chance. And they reject it all. And that was it. So, it runs out eventually. And that ought to be a lesson for us, obviously. Yes. Now, we don't want to hear any weird thoughts. Yeah, that water was on, it covered the earth for 6 months or more than that. I think you have to worry about that. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Yeah. And she asked about the bodies floating around in the flood. And for those of you that didn't hear the question or the comment, I said the water was around long enough. I think it was mostly, I had to worry about that. Yeah.
I think there's a lesson from the vine dresser there as well. He wanted to work with this tree that was not productive. Let me work with it for another year and see if we can get something out of it. And there's a lesson here. Sometimes church members are not productive, but when somebody takes patience to deal with them, to work with them, encourage them, and show them the right way, then they become productive. And that's maybe a lot of problem in the church because we don't work with those who are wicked.
I'm glad you brought that up because there are some commentators look at the vine dresser here, and we may have skipped over that. Let's not. Some commentators look at the vine dresser and see him as just kind of incidental to the parable. Others, however, if God is the owner of this orchard or vineyard and he comes seeking fruit, and this vine dresser intercedes on behalf of the barren fig tree and says, no, wait, let me work with it another year. Other people see this vine dresser as perhaps representing who in the parable? Who's our advocate, our intercessor? Christ, absolutely. Think about it for a minute. When Christ was actually on the earth, and he got to the end of Matthew chapter 23, before he gave the discourse in 24 on the destruction of Jerusalem, notice his attitude toward the Jewish nation. Even then, Jesus said what at the end of chapter 23? Yeah, he wept over the city. I mean, he longed for these people to change. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that, kill the prophets and stone those that I've sent to you. How often I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, and you would not. I mean, he still longed to bring these people to himself. And so some see, even in this parable, perhaps, a glimpse of Christ as the vine dresser who says, oh, let's, give it some time. I mean, let's face it. They killed him. They rejected him. They killed him. And then even after that, they had 40 years of gospel preaching, right? They had the Holy Spirit inspired apostles and prophets preaching to them. And so, great patience. And And so the point you make is valid, even if in this parable the vine dresser doesn't represent Christ. It certainly, I think, as you pointed out, is worth saying that sometimes we as people can give up on other people a little too quickly. I mean, look how patient God is. Sometimes we'll give up on other people real easily. Yeah.
Remember back in the Old Testament, God was ready to destroy the Israelites, and Moses interceded and had an effect on God. Jeremiah also would intercede, but in Jeremiah 15, it's gotten to the point, Jeremiah's told, even if Samuel or Moses were here interceding on behalf of his people, I wouldn't hear it. It would come to the end. But the point is, as far as the vine dresser, which is us, the intercession demands activity. If you're willing to put the effort into it, and Moses put the effort into it, definitely. And Jeremiah was willing to, at least it appears.
And so for us, I mean, there's got to be a willingness, rather than just writing people off, or the work of the church, or whatever it is, or a congregation, but to put the work into it. Yeah, that's a good point. Are you going?
Well, yeah, but this not pertaining to earlier. One of our problems are, you mentioned just a moment ago about giving up. We're not nearly, well, I gotta be careful how I say it. We're not very patient with each other.
Right.
We expect results now. Even in the business world in this country compared to Asia, these folks plot out 20, 25, 30 years. We want it every quarter. We want to see results. And if not, why not? But,
Yeah, don't we get job reports every month or something, don't we? In the paper, right? So many jobs were created this month, so many weren't created last month. Yeah, we're all about immediate results, there's no question in our society. We want it now. And of course, that giving up on other people, we're always more patient with ourselves and our friends and our relatives than we are with other people. In other words, you know, the same faults, we're a lot more patient with ourselves than we
but I
are
want
with
to
other
add something to that too, Greg, is that I think it's endemic. I mean, you hear a lot about Generation X, Generation Z, B, and every other thing. Immediate gratification. We just don't delay the gratification. We want it yesterday, and if not, why not? Because my neighbor has got it. We have to be very careful of being self-centered ourselves, particularly when we're rearing our children. And I'm sure that folks in here, there's a few folks in here, almost my age, whose parents came out of the Depression. Our parents came out of it, I guess it probably still was, but we didn't have it. We had to delay the gratification. And what I taught my children is that if the BMW will come, don't expect it today as soon as you get out of college. Delay the gratification, pay your dues, eyes and ears open, mouth shut, keep the right attitude, you'll do okay. I tend to believe that.
Well, and we not only, and that's of course, getting back to the parable, we not only have that issue with material things, but we have that issue when it comes to the work of the church as well, about expecting things to happen, you know, quickly. And when you're dealing with people, nothing happens quickly. Not when you're dealing with people's minds and hearts and changing of lives. I mean, that's tiring, long, drawn out, dirty business. You know, getting involved with people and teaching them the gospel, or whether it's Christians, you know, new Christians, and you're trying to get them to understand how this is the way a Christian lives, or whether you're trying to get a congregation motivated to be more involved in this work or that work. I mean, it's a long process. And so, whether you're an elder or a preacher or a deacon or whatever, you can't expect things to just. And so, I'm sure, I know in the school, I mean, they tell these young preachers to go out. I mean, you don't go into a congregation and think, oh, well, you know, we got 100 people this year, and I expect by the end of my first year we'll be 300 people or something. everything will just be hunky-dory and everybody will be living perfect lives. And that's not the way life is, and that's not the way it works. We have to have a lot more, just like God, we have to have a lot more patience. And frankly, it's more than just patience. It's more than, in this case, we are talking about God's patience is long-suffering. But we're also talking about hupomone, we're talking about endurance, which is an active term, which says I'm going to stick it out, and I'm going to stick to it, and I'm going to persevere through something. And so it's not just sitting back and being inactive. While we do have to be patient and long-suffering with people, from our perspective, we have to persevere through some things. And so there's an active part of it. Yes? Well, when somebody says, leave me alone, you just have to take that to mean, leave me alone right now. It don't necessarily mean leave me alone next week, or next month, or next year. Huh? That's what I'm saying. When somebody says, leave me alone about anything, all you can take them to mean is, leave me alone right this minute. That's the way we have to take it. I mean, if you're concerned about somebody's soul that much, and they're going to tell you to leave me alone one time, and you're never going to talk to them again about it, ever. That doesn't make sense. Okay, I'll leave you alone today. But maybe not tomorrow, or next week, or next year. Any more questions or comments about the barren fig tree? But it looks. You got any comments, Jackie? You had one several weeks ago. My wife said I ignored your hand. It was up, so she got after me for it. So I'm giving you a chance today. In fact, if you can remember what comment you were going to make several weeks ago, I'll let you go ahead and make it today. Otherwise, all I can do is apologize. All right, let's turn over to Luke chapter 6 now. You know, teaching in this auditorium is like one of those panoramic pictures. But you got to do this. The parable of the unjust steward. Luke 16. He also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward. And an accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig. In other words, I can't do any manual labor. And I'm ashamed to beg. Well, good for you. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first. And of course, these two are just representative, probably several. How much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, take your bill, sit down quickly and write it. And he said to another, how much do you owe? So he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill, write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. Now, I think the King James says wisely. Shrewdly is probably a better translation. For one thing, wisely, in the Bible, the term wisely or wisdom generally accompanies with it moral goodness along with the decision. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, continues in this context, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon. What's mammon?
Money.
Yeah, money, wealth. That when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. He who is is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if you've not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. What is it that's required of stewards? And what is a steward, by the way? Yeah, he's a manager, and in this case, perhaps a slave or servant, but he's one that manages the goods or the assets that belong to somebody else. And so what does Paul say, the Holy Spirit through Paul say is required of stewards in 1 Corinthians 4, chapter, verse 2? That they be found faithful, right? Yeah, that's the responsibility of a steward. Now, there's no question that we're all stewards, right? I mean, God owns everything. We're stewards of the things with which He's entrusted us. So our responsibility is to be found faithful. Now, this fellow, it says, wasted the possessions of his master. So he was not a good steward. He was not faithful. Now, there is some debate among the commentators about this next thing that he pulls. We know that Jesus was not condoning dishonest behavior. That's not the point of the parable. But there's even some question among commentators, and I don't know exactly what the answer is, about whether this was even dishonest. What he did, because of the way that transactions occurred in the first century. But you recall in the law, the Jews could not charge interest to fellow Jews. Right? So the courts would say, if you had a document, a contract that said, I'm charging you X with so much interest, that contract's no good. So let's say I'm charging you $80 and then $20 of interest. That's no good. But what they would do is just write up a contract for $100. You wouldn't say interest. Wouldn't divide out the principal from the interest. They'd just say, you're going to pay me $100. And the courts would say, that's fine, even though the interest is in there. So it is possible that this fellow just called the debtors and said, look, and this would have been about right, 50 measures of oil, we'll talk about those amounts, 50 of it was interest. He just actually sat down and changed the bill to the right amount, to only the principal. Or perhaps he did the same thing on the weekend. And so, and actually, in society's eyes, that looked pretty good on the master, that he would do that. So he tells this guy, hey, that's pretty smart. You made me look good, and you were actually, the point of the parable, of course, is preparing himself for the future. What was going to happen to him after he lost his position. And that's what we'll talk about next week. Now, it is possible that what he pulled was a flim flam, and that all the debtors were certainly willing to go along with it because they got out of paying some of their debt. But either way, that's not the point. Jesus is not endorsing dishonest behavior. The point of the parable is being prepared for the future, and that's what we'll talk about.
Beware.